G'day, it's Doug Jackson from DougsWordClocks.com, here to show you the next step of putting together one of our 30cm clock kits. In the previous video we made our clock frame, which also included the light baffles for each of the individual words. The light baffles are of course there so that when that word is lit up, the word above it and the word below it don't illuminate as well. So to do this next step, we'll need our frame that we've previously assembled. We'll need our word clock circuit board. We'll need our hardware kit, our small components kit, and we need some tools. We need a Phillips head screwdriver. We need a pair of side cutters. We need a pair of pliers. We also need a soldering iron. I use a standard old Weller soldering iron. This is about I think it's about a 30-watt iron. It's specifically designed for electronics work. It is not the kind of soldering iron that you use for doing LED lights, one of the old plumber's irons. They're completely inappropriate. And I use solder. So I actually have 60/40 solder here. So there we go. So let's make a start. So the first thing we need to do is we need to mount the word clock circuit board into the frame. And you'll find it just sits in place without any issues at all. Turn it over, double check that each of the words is visible through the thing, double check that the word clock label is at the bottom where the power plug is, power socket mounting hole, and now we're ready to mount the circuit board. So inside our little hardware kit you'll find a whole pile of goodies. You'll find 7 of these tiny little white nylon screws. We only need 5 for this step. Grab a screwdriver. The holes in the mount are pre-threaded for you, so it's just a case of gently screwing the 5 mounting screws in place. 2. Now of course these are nylon screws, these are not metal screws being drilled into plastic, so be gentle, don't force them with all of your might, but for the purposes of mounting these boards, nylon is absolutely perfect. There we go, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. Okay, the next step is to solder the miniature components onto the board. Now there are 2 tiny little components that we don't pre-solder onto the board for you. They are specifically the real-time clock oscillator crystal. This is the tiny little component here. It is literally about 4mm long, 1.5mm, 2mm round. So it is tiny. So just be very gentle with it. So the first thing I do is I form the leads. I separate them by a little bit. And we're going to solder it into the position labelled X2 onto those 2 large pads. Let's just bring that up so that you can see the X2 position there, and the component will be mounted on those 2 pads. So in we go, hot soldering iron, just a tack solder joint onto the pads first. Now tack soldering is never good enough. We always follow that up by actual fresh solder. So 1, 2, simple as that. So that's now got that component installed. Okay, now we need to install the backup capacitor. This is the official name for this component is it is a super capacitor. It's essentially it's more or less a tiny little battery, which can be recharged essentially an infinite number of times. Now if you look really carefully, and it probably won't actually turn up on this video, on one leg at that position there is a tiny little minus sign in a circle. You can also tell that that leg is minus because at the top of the component is 2 arrows, and the arrows point towards the minus. You'll notice on the circuit board here there's a plus there, and of course that's minus, so that's positive, that's negative. We just need to install the supercapacitor with the negative lead in the correct spot. So let's do that step. Again, set it in, make sure the negative is in the correct slot, and a tiny little bit of solder, and then that's done. Done! So we can now do a close-up of that component in place. You can see it's a nice, shiny, rounded solder joint. It's not crystalline, it's not yucky, it's totally fine. Now the next step is to assemble what's called the button board. I just heard Megan arrive, so she's about to say hi Doug through the garage door. That's cool, she's been out at the gym. So in order to assemble the button board we need 2 white nylon screws, the 2 nylon spacers, the 2 push buttons, and the button board itself. So let's start by, this is the front of the button board, and of course the other side, that's the back. And what we'll do, hi Megs, how are you?
Hello.
Everyone say hi Megs.
Hi.
There we go. Did you have fun at the gym?
I did.
Awesome. I'll come in later, sweet, once I finish this. Bye.
Bye.
Okie dokie. Now, we install the little screw, and then we just need to install the 2 little buttons, and they do fit. You've just got to be gentle. I should do that on camera, sorry. Let's do this one here. 1, 2, and 3. There are 4 little holes. There we go. And then we'll install our last little threaded spacer. 4. Simple as that. I love making things that are simple to work on. Simple and gentle and slow and easy. So, you see the label, one of the labels here is the word down. One of the labels is the word up. So down, you'll notice one of the time set positions is negative, one of the time set positions is positive. So we'll put the word down into the one labelled negative. And then we use our Phillips head screwdriver to gently use one of the black nylon screws to hold that little button board in place. 1, 2. Beautiful. Okay, now we need to do a little bit of soldering. So, and this is probably best to look at the manual for. I'll just do it on the video. The resolution's not going to be perfect. We just need to apply solder into the positive and negative connection of the power input. Then we need to apply solder to the time setting buttons. When I originally designed the board, I was envisaging having 2 or 3 push buttons at the bottom, and I decided in the end not to include, for example, the alarm function. So there's no alarm button, and there's no alarm piezo hardware in there. Having an alarm on a wall clock is a crazy plan. So I decided to just simply do the soldering this way and keep it really simple. So there we go. So I've now soldered the push buttons into the button board. I've soldered the pads ready for the wiring. 3, I've got the pads there ready for the power wiring. So, wiring, you say? Oh no. Included in the kit is a small piece of 5-strand cable. I just strip each end. That's 2 sets stripped. Separate these into groups. So I want one wire group which has got 3 wires and one wire group which has got 2. This one has 2 wires, of course. This one has, the one down there has 3. The one with 2 wires we'll use for the power connection. The one with 3 wires we'll use for the push buttons. So there we go. So we've now separated out. So first things first, before we use any wire, we always tin it. And tinning is just the act of pre-soldering the connections so that we don't have bare wire sucking solder up once we install them. Now you'll notice that there are 3 little holes at the bottom of the button board. We'll use those to do the wiring. Again, the instruction manual is probably the best place to grab that a close-up of that information. This video is certainly not for that. Now, one of these is connected to the button that's on this side, which is the negative. So follow the wire. This one's negative, that means that one's positive and that one's ground. So flip it over, negative onto the negative pin, center, and positive. There we go. That's done. Now we need to install our power socket. So over here we have a standard coaxial power socket and a nut. So power socket goes in there. Oh, just before, you'll notice if you look at the end, one connection is connected to the center. So let's push that out to one side. And so that gets connected to the center pin. And that is the other connection that we need. We don't need this third one. Chop it off for simplicity. Now we just use our pliers just to do the little nut up. And there we go. So we can pre-tin our connections here. 1, 2. We'll connect the, let's pre-tin this cable here. 2, turn it over. 1, 2. Now this particular clock is actually for a friend of mine. She doesn't know that she's going to get it yet. It's all cool. So there we go. So now we connect the one that went to the center pin of the socket goes to the outside. Again, looking at the video, looking at the installation manual, the instruction manual is almost certainly the best plan. So we can just solder these to those nice big pads. So you'll see again we have nice clean well soldered connections. Nice clean well soldered connections. Now, moment of truth, we can actually test it. On the workbench, because it's a workbench, I have a power lead that is always powered up. Now, very, very, very safe to apply power. So in this case, I apply power and I instantly know that things are right, because you see the little light? The little power light tells me that the clock is ready and running. Turn the clock over, unplug it, plug it in, and you'll see each of the words going through a test. There we go. Time forward moves time forwards, time back moves time back. Guess what? That's the next step done. So we can in fact leave this be for a little while and go and have a cuppa, which is what I'll do now. Okay, catch you on the next video.